We are live. Hello. I am happy to be here today with all of you. I am joined by my beautiful friend, Robin, who's all the way across the pond in the UK. Is that right?
Yep, I'm in York, England. We've been here. My husband and I are nomadic. We've been here now since January. So we've got a couple more months, and we've got a month in Bristol, and then we're going to have 2 months in Ireland before we head back to the States.
Oh, that is so cool. I love that. I've been very much looking forward to having a chance to catch up and hear all about your adventures. And I love every single topic that you could possibly come up to speak on. So when I invited you on the channel, I was really just like, anything you say will be fine by me, because there's so many things, that we've done over the past few years. Of course, lots of astrology, but I know you tinker with tarot. You're a wonderful Lenormand reader. I love your ritual work. I love when you share like the charts of famous people, and show how, well, of course they did this because they had this in their chart, at this time. So there's so many things that I mean, we have enough content, I feel like, to schedule lives forever. But today we're going to be talking about the various systems, and I'm excited to get into that because this whole entire time, well, actually, let me go back just a little bit. In my mind, I'm an Aries, right? And that was it. And then a few years back, I learned that there was this whole thing about like ascending signs, and I was like, oh, then things started to make sense and click in my mind. And here recently, I discovered that, well, actually, in the real sky, you're, Pisces. And I was like, wait, what? So there's so much information and content out there, and people that are, believers of specific systems. So I thought it would be an interesting topic. So maybe before we get started, Robin, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your site. I know you have a blog and a couple other things. So tell us a little bit about you.
You know what is so funny about that? First of all, thank you for all of the wonderful things. I've loved our work over the years. And as soon as you invited me on your live, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like 10,000 topics. What can we choose? So yeah, I'm super excited. And I will say I am a live newbie. This is popping my live cherry. It's my first live on YouTube. So thank you. Thank you for being my first. It's funny because I also do like interview training, and I help people for interviewing and working on their resumes on the mundane side of things. And yesterday I was working with somebody, and she was like, I suck at interviews. And I was like, why? And she's like, because I never know what to say when people say, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I was like, oh, well, have you ever practiced the answer to that question? And she was like, no, I don't know what to say. And I went into this detail, and I failed to practice the answer. I had no idea the very next day I would get asked that question. All right. So I spent a long time in the sort of small business world. I was an SAT tutor for 25 years. I worked with thousands of clients. I worked for Netscape, and I just couldn't stop being like woo-woo. I couldn't stop being spiritual and hearing voices and connecting with the spirits of trees. And so I finally made the switch after many unhappy years masquerading as a more conventional business person into working with astrology. And I actually got into astrology because I was having this weird health thing where I would get healthy when I moved onto the East Coast, and then I would move back to the West Coast and get sick. And then I would move east, got better. And then I moved west and I got sick. And Western doctors can't explain that sort of thing. They've lost the knowledge of how location affects your health. So I got into astrology because I'm like, well, maybe in the previous, 200,000 years of human history, somebody's figured out something that explains this. And then I just sucked me in. So the website, spiritsaid.com. SPIRITSAID, spiritsaid.com. There's a blog, there are office hours, and today I started my Patreon. Yay!
Oh, that's so cool. I'm excited to hear that.
Thank you. I put a really cool goodie up there. So there's a 7-page Lot of Fortune workbook available for people who join the free tier, just to come and check out what I'm about. I put up 2 articles, both beta read by you, by the way. So thank you for giving me all the feedback. Those are now up. And then also, there's a couple of replays. You can check out the lectures. Today, I am recording a lecture on analyzing your life fortune in different locations. So you can figure out like where to move or where to travel or where to bring in other energies. I've got my Islamic earrings on here because I have really good energy in the Near East. So I'm wearing jewelry from that location.
Yes. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a whole nother live. We can discuss it.
Yes. And I do have a link to your site, and it's in the description box for our friends that are in the chat. So I'm just gonna take a minute real quick to say hello to our friends. Jackie, thank you so much for being here and welcome. Actually, I think Jackie is probably closer to where you are than to here. I think she's out there in the UK too. But yes, so let's see, where should we begin?
I think we should dive in.
Okay, let's do it.
I was trying to fall asleep last night, and my spirit guides wanted me to do like a run through of what I was going to say. So this is my literally. I was like, "Didn't I sleep?" And they're like, "You can sleep later. Now you should practice." I'm like, "Okay." So this all got started because Elizabeth, you said to me in an email, you're like, "I used to think there were 3 different systems," and I'm like, "There are 3 different systems." Okay, so we're talking today about tropical, sidereal, and true sky astrology. So those are the 3 different systems we're discussing. But I just want to say that, so we have 3 different systems we're talking about today: tropical, sidereal, and true sky. But what I want to say is that this is sort of like only the outer skin of the onion of astrology systems, because humans have been looking at the sky for, like, depending on who you ask, 250,000 years. So I don't want to suggest that somehow these 3 systems are the only 3 systems. And it's worth mentioning that systems are only really used sort of in like Europe and America and the United States. And, but in South America, they have their own indigenous systems. In China, Chinese astrology doesn't use the zodiac. It's something different. Like, I think we really need to, if you go online, there's a lot of debates about which one is true and which one is right. And there are often, in my opinion, sort of hurtful things said about people who believe the other system. Somebody accused astrologers of clinging to a phantom sky and playing pretend if they weren't using true sky. And I'm like, honey, this stuff is only like 5,000 years old. And it's not even at use everywhere in the globe, right? So I think it's very nice to talk about the 3 different systems, and I want to help people understand them. And you may find that on your spiritual path, you love one and you hate others. One works much better for you. But to say that somehow these are the only 3, or one of these is right, or you have to choose one, I think is sort of culturally insensitive and also ignorant about the history of astrology, which is going on in many places all over the globe. So this is not intending to say that you need to use one of these 3 systems. There are lots of other systems that are also good. Okay, that's my caveat. So the difference between the 3 systems. So tropical astrology and sidereal astrology both use the 12-sign zodiac that most of us are familiar with here in Europe and America, the UK, right? So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. Now, the thing that's important to understand is that in tropical and sidereal astrology, the zodiac signs are not the constellations. Now, they are named after the constellations. So back in the day, and we'll talk about why in a second, astrologers decided that it would be much simpler and easier to use astrology if you just divided up the sky into 12 equal segments. And the fact that they're equal allows you to do a lot of very cool mathematical things. But the constellations are not 12 equal segments. So the zodiac is a division of the sky, and then each division was named after the constellation that was in that division when the system was sort of generally put together. So it's sort of like you might be named after your great aunt Bertha because you have some similar qualities to Bertha, but you're not the same as Bertha.
That's a perfect way to think about it.
Right? Or like imagine that we call the entire state of Florida Miami. Okay, Miami is in Florida, but the actual state of Florida is a different entity.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, when you see people who are like, well, the zodiac's not real or it's not true, they're sort of confused about this because the zodiac signs have the same name as the constellations. And so they think that they should actually map up. But people back in the day, and this system was developed, people argue, but something like 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. We have, in the Babylonians, basically sort of got it going. People are not idiots. It was possible to look at the sky 3,000 to 5,000 years ago and realize that Virgo is huge and Scorpio is tiny. Like, there's a reason they didn't use the constellations, which is that there are a lot of cool things you can do if you come up with segments that are of equal size. So tropical astrology and sidereal astrology both use 12 equal segments. They're all 30 degrees each, and they're named after the constellations, but they're not the same as the constellations. Okay. True sky astrology is, now this is controversial, but this is my opinion, a modern development. There are some people who are like, no, true sky is going back to the way they did it back in the day. And that may be true. But if that's true, it predates the zodiac and there's no actual written evidence of people doing it this way. Okay, so true sky astrology basically says, well, why aren't we using the constellations? Right? Like we have the constellations up there. Why have we made this like artificial distinction where everything has to be exactly 30 degrees when we have the beauty of the constellations in the night sky above us? Let's just use those. We can see that Venus is against the backdrop of Pisces. We're going to use that. And that's a super cool way to do astrology. But it's not the only way to do astrology, because you're basically saying now we think the constellations are the most important thing that we should map the planets onto, rather than these sort of equal divisions of the zodiac.
And that makes sense. Like, I get like why it was attractive to, but in a sense, it's like forcing something into a space that didn't really fit.
Yeah, it's exactly like building a house.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Like,
If you're going to
make it work, we'll make it work.
That's right. Exactly. So this is part of what humans do, is they create these artificial constructs because they're useful. So like you could live in a cave and the cave would keep the roof off, the rain off, and a cave is like a nice constant temperature, and a cave is great protection from wild animals, but there's no place for the smoke from your fire to exit the cave.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason we don't live in caves, even though they are great, because once we figured out we could build houses, we're like, oh my gosh, now I can have a hole in the roof. Now I can have a door. Now I can have windows. Like I can create all of these things that allow me to live in a more comfortable way.
Mm-hmm.
So right or wrong, but we have this idea that somehow artificial constructs are bad. And I'm like antibiotics are artificial constructs. Like a house is an artificial construct, like a feather bed is an artificial construct. There's a reason that we build these. So I totally support people who love mapping onto the constellations, but we'll talk about why there's some things that are not so useful about mapping onto constellations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the second thing I want to say is that mapping onto constellations, people will often say, well, it's not artificial. This is the real sky, unlike these like little, segments of the pie. And like, that's true in a lot of ways, because you can go outside and look up at the sky and be like, oh, Venus is in Pisces. That's so cool. But humans are still making decisions about how they want to interpret that, because there are some gaps between the constellations. Sometimes they overlap, but sometimes there's a gap. So if your planet's in the middle, do you just like pick an arbitrary division? And you're like, well, on this side, it's, Leo, and on this side, it's Virgo. Well, some people do that. Some true sky astrologers do. Other true sky astrologers are like, no, it's a mix of both. Like it's an overlap of energies. And other true sky astrologers are like, no, there's some fixed stars in the middle there. So we're not thinking about the constellations there. We're thinking about the fixed stars. And I think all of those are fine. And I love true sky astrology in part because I think it's really ripe for discovery and experimentation, and I love seeing astrology pushed forward. But I don't want people to think that somehow it's like this all natural practice where everything is obvious and humans aren't making interpretive decisions. Because the fact of the matter is that humans have been looking at the sky and making interpretive decisions for that hundreds of thousands of years. Like the planet Venus has nothing to say about your relationships at all. It's just a bright spot in the sky.
We have some friends in the chat, Robin. And
Yeah,
so I wanted to take a minute to say hello and good morning. We have Desiree joining us. Desiree is a huge practitioner of astrology and tarot, so
wow.
very excited. And then Soul Whisperer, that's Althea, has joined us, and I believe she's in South America.
Wow.
And then so yes, and I wanted to highlight that, let's see here. Desiree says the human mind is always trying to make sense of the environment. Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Friends,
So,
thank
you
you
know,
so
I
much
feel
for being here. If there's anything that comes up and you have any questions for Robin, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll periodically to field some of the questions. So Althea says that she is trying to learn Vedic.
Yeah, super cool. So I'm glad you brought the Vedic up because we're gonna talk about that. And I just want to be open and say that I am primarily a tropical astrologer, although I have used all of these other systems and I do continue to use them periodically. And when I was first getting into astrology, I asked my spirit guide, which system should I choose? Because, you know, we're all like, oh my gosh, there's all these systems, and then the adherents of one tell you you're wrong if you use the other one. And my spirit guide said I should be using tropical, which I will be honest was the one I was least drawn to, because I sort of got into this whole, like, it's artificial and we should be looking at the sky and I love the stars. And I was like, well, why should I use that one? And they're like, because that's the one that your clients are going to come to you already familiar with, and you'll be able to help the most people if you use tropical.
Oh, that's powerful.
Well, it had nothing to do with tropical is right, or tropical is the most accurate, or tropical is historically, approved of. They were just like, no, you're going to help more people if you're not trying to like switch people out of the system they already know.
Yeah.
Now, that does not mean that other astrologers will help the most people with tropical, right? Your spirit guides might be like, oh, you should totally check out Sidereal, or oh, you'll love True Sky. Like somebody was telling me that her spirit guides told her that she had to do True Sky, and now she's realized that tropical astrology is a trap. And I'm like, oh. Okay, but if your spirit guides told you to use True Sky, I totally support that for you. Mm-hmm. It's just my spirit guides knew what I wanted to achieve with astrology, and they're like, you're going to actually be able to achieve that with tropical. So as far as I can tell, good astrologers can make amazing predictions and delineations with any one of these systems. Plus the systems from South America and the systems from China and the systems that didn't even get recorded because they're before the invention of human writing. Like, I think they all produce great delineations. But I do want to talk about the difference between tropical and sidereal, because we talked about tropical and sidereal have the divisions of the zodiac. True Sky is moving on to the constellations. But tropical and sidereal are different because the tropical astrology has pinned the beginning of Aries to the spring equinox. So the spring equinox happens pretty much every year on like March 20th or March 21st. And they decided a long time ago that that was going to count as the sun moving into the Aries. It's the beginning of the astrological year. Now, the thing is that in about 285 AD, the spring equinox actually was at 0 degrees of Aries, sort of relative to the constellations. So that's the point where they matched up, 285 AD. But the Earth's orbit has a little bit of a wobble in it. And every year there's it's like a 53-second lag about where you come back to the spring equinox. And what happens is that the actual stars move backwards at a rate of, get this, 1 degree every 72 years. Okay, so that means that if I live to age 72, fingers crossed, my grandmother made it to her mid-90s, so I think I'm good. If I make it to age 72, what that means is that the spring equinox on the day of my 72nd year will be 1 degree back from the stars where it was on the day that I was born. Okay. This is called the precession of the equinoxes. The earliest writing that we have on this is from a Greek mathematician named Hipparchus from like 129 BCE. So people have known about this for 2,000 years, and thus the debate about tropical versus sidereal astrology is 2,000 years old. Don't let any article tell you astronomers have just discovered that the zodiac signs are out of alignment. Astrology signs are wrong. Like, this is not new. And astrologers have been talking about this for a long time. So this debate that we're having right now about should we map them to the stars or should we pin them to the equinox has been going on for a long time, and people have been coming down on both sides. And the short answer is that the astrology that is native to the Indian subcontinent came down on the side of we should adjust for the movement of the stars. And the astrology that is sort of like from the Middle East and West came down on the side of no, we should stick with the 0 point at the spring equinox. And if the stars move backwards, we'll adjust for that using fixed stars, but the actual zodiac signs are going to be pinned to the movement of the sun. And that's one of the biggest differences, is that the tropical zodiac is pinned to the equinoxes and thus the movement of the sun around the earth. And the sidereal zodiac is pinned to the background stars, and thus it moves backwards at a degree of 1 degree every 72 years. So
that one seems like less common. I've never encountered someone who says, oh, I practice sidereal. It's usually either like tropical or real sky. So it's super interesting.
Okay, so that would be totally different if you lived in India. Okay, now anytime somebody says that they're a Vedic astrologer, they are practicing almost certainly, not always, but almost certainly, the majority of the time they're practicing sidereal astrology. Yep. Now, I will say that not everybody likes the term Vedic, because some people say that actually Vedic is sort of has these religious or spiritual overtones that are separate from the astrological practice. I prefer to call it the astrology of the Indian subcontinent, because that at least localizes it to where, but if you want to use the Vedic term Vedic, you can. Anyway, Vedic astrology is mostly sidereal. And that's because the Indian culture had a pre-existing astrological system that was predicated on the places of the moon. And then they sort of like married the zodiac on top of that. But because they were already very focused on the movements of the moon with respect to the background stars, there was much more adherence to the tradition of keeping track with the movement of the stars. And so now there are some modern Vedic astrologers or Indian astrology, subcontinent astrologers. There are no good names. There are some of them who are like, no, actually, we think we should switch to tropical. And then there are debates about like the sages of old and the original writings, were they referring to tropical, were they referring to sidereal? But most Vedic astrologers now are doing sidereal astrology. So it's still artificial in the sense that it's like got this division, but it is pinned to the movement of the stars. And I want to get away from the idea that because something is a human construct, it's therefore is bad. I think there are good things about human constructs and bad things. And I also think true sky is also a human construct, because, you know, if we were in the Mayan culture thousands of years ago, we wouldn't be talking about any of this. We'd be doing something completely different. Like their constellations were not the same as our constellations.
Yes.
All right. So has that been helpful about like the difference between the three systems?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So does anybody want to ask questions about that? Because I do have material prepared on the pros and cons and how you can like incorporate them into your practice.
I'm checking the chat. Periodically I'll look over here to the side so I can track the chat. I don't see
Mhm.
any questions, other than what is this discussion on? But that
Great.
is outlined in the title. Today we're talking about the pros and cons of the various systems. Okay. So
Yeah.
Desiree says, can one use both systems?
The answer is absolutely yes. And you can use a mix of all three, which is basically what I do.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious because that was the follow-up question.
A mix of all three. So yeah, and I'm gonna explain when I use them and what I think they're all good for, because I do think they all have strength. So one thing to keep in mind is that some people are more is more people, and some people are like less is more people. And then of course there's the medium is more people in the middle. So I'm a more is more person, and as a result, I like mixing all three together. But you should feel free to pick one that works for you and use that for years.
Sidereal.
Right.
So the
So
third would be the true sky.
sky, right, which maps the planets onto the constellations using their actual size, right? Because some constellations are like 50 degrees and others are more like 15 degrees. They're not all these neat
Mm.
30 degrees.
Yeah. Althea says that that's new for her. And, if you want,
Oh.
we can use the example of like Aries, right? Because Aries is actually a really small constellation.
Mm-hmm.
And before Aries is Pisces, and that one is really large. So
Exactly, right.
in one system, I am Aries, but in the real sky, I am Pisces.
Yeah. So there are basically two variables going on. One is the variable size of the constellations, where some are really big and some are really small.
Mm,
And two is the fact that the actual relationship between the sun equinox point and the stars is moving backwards at a regular rate of 1 degree every 72 years. So that's what gives rise to the confusion of the three
mm.
systems. Okay. So as far as the pros of each, and this has to get into when you're using all three. Okay. It is cool to go outside on a clear night and look up at the sky and see like a planet against a background of some constellation, and then just open yourself to what does it mean to me that I am out here on a night and I see Venus with Pisces in the background. Like that energy flow into you. Right? And I'll get to Ophiuchus in just a moment. Right? There's
Yes.
something great about like humans have been looking at the sky for hundreds of thousands of years, and I am a human on planet Earth, and I am looking at the sky, and I can see the planet, and I can see the stars. What is the message for me? So I love that. And if you don't know how to find the stars or the planets, just get an app for your phone and hold it up, and it will identify the
Yes, I
constellations.
love
It will
it. It looks
identify the
so pretty.
planets.
I like to pretend that I know what they are and that that's
Uh-huh.
what I see myself when I look into the sky.
Exactly. Right. And I think that that is a very spiritual, or can be a very spiritual experience, because you're
Wow.
literally opening yourself to the energies of the universe, the energies of the planets, the energies of the constellations. And I think that that's super healthy. And we spend a lot of time opening ourselves up to the energies of our cell phone, right? Or the energies of politics, or the energies of rants, right? And
Hmm.
I think it's great to open yourself up to the energies of your natural world. So that's my favorite thing to do with True Sky, is to actually go out and use my eyeballs to look at a planet. And you can find conjunctions that way. You can see Mars and Venus together. At one point, we lived in Los Angeles, and right after dinner, if you went out to the beach, you could see literally like Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, like all lined up in a row. And there were
Mm.
people who came out and just brought picnic blankets and sat on the sand dunes and just like looked up at the stars. Like it was great. So you absolutely can do that. And there are also True Sky astrology calculators. So you can put your chart into those and see if you resonate with that chart. There is a YouTube channel called Mastering the Zodiac, and the guy does True Sky astrology. His name is Athan Chimeni, and I think he's good. So if you want to learn more about it and understand what it's like, I definitely, support people in learning more. And I think so. I think my favorite thing to do with True Sky astrology is actually to go out and look at the sky and open myself up. And I think that that's a practice that I would recommend for all astrologers who want to level up in their astrology stuff.
So that reminds me of something that I wanted to share with you, but I want to take a minute to go back to our friend Dean in the chat because he's asked a couple of times, like, what is this about? And so we explained that this was about the different systems of astrology. And so his follow up question is this somehow linked to spirituality?
Yeah. I think the answer is if you want it to be, it can be. And I personally find that linking it to my spirituality has been a huge help. And that's in part because I get a lot of insight from my spirit guides. There's a lot of astrology that I never would have understood if they hadn't explained things to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also because understanding astrology has helped me understand myself so I can be more authentic, which enhances my spiritual connection. But I also think that it is perfectly possible to approach astrology as sort of like an exercise where you just read charts and you look at mathematical numbers and you're timing transits and you're tracking stock market prices. I think that astrology was really designed to help us with the challenges of our daily life. And so it doesn't have to be a spiritual thing if you don't want it to be. But personally, I love making my astrology spiritual. And for me, that's a huge part of why I like it, because I felt like so much of school was like drawing me away from my spiritual connection. And I love the fact that I found something I can do with my brain that draws me towards my spiritual connection.
You know, tarot is like that because there are people that use the tarot purely for psychological type of work, and then people that have deeply rooted spiritual practices with the tarot. So, you know, that could kind of apply to a lot of different things. So hopefully, Dean, that answers your question, but please let us know if there is something else that you were interested in. The other thing I was going to share, like what you were saying, that you like to go outside and open yourself up to the sky. So, and Desiree, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So, Desiree, a couple of days ago, she, she made this big post, right, about the fact that we were going to be able to see the lunar eclipse. And so then she didn't realize that she got the date messed up, right? She got the date messed up. She was like a day ahead of herself. So she went outside to observe, and then there was nothing there except an owl, and she was face to face with this owl, and she thought to herself, if I hadn't gone out there to look for the eclipse, that it was a day too early, I would never had this experience with the owl. And that's what your story reminds me of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It is also nice to have another version of your chart. So aside from actually using observational astrology, which is how they did it back in the day, I think True Sky is great for just having sort of an alternate perspective on yourself. But I will give a caveat here. So as preparing for this live stream, I wandered around on Threads a lot. And I asked a lot of Threads users who were True Sky people and Sidereal people, why do you like your system? How did you get into it? What is important? And there were a lot of people, and it was funny because they were all mentioning Capricorn. And they said, I never resonated with my Capricorn sun or moon or whatever until I found True Sky. And then I discovered I wasn't really a Capricorn at all. And actually, I'm really a Sagittarius. I love Sagittarius energy. I'm way more fiery, sort of like to heck with that Capricorn crap. Right? And I totally support you in finding a chart that you like better. But everybody has all 12 energies. So whether or not you've decided that now you're not really Capricorn because you like the Sagittarius better, like I would suggest that you query that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use True Sky astrology if you like it. I think that's great. But I think that the idea that I like this better because now I'm not a Capricorn anymore. Like I will say, as somebody who has a Capricorn moon, and my mom's a Capricorn and my sister's a Capricorn, Capricorn energy gets a lot of crap. And when I work with clients and I say, oh, you have such and such in Capricorn, they're like, their noses crinkle up and they're like, somebody the other day was like, oh, that sounds boring. I was talking about her lot of fortune in Capricorn. She's like, that sounds really dull. And I'm like, it's like Capricorn's like the IBM of signs, right? Nobody wants to. Anyway, so if you like your chart better in a different system, I think that's great. But if part of you is like, well, now I get to escape this icky placement I don't like it might be time to do some integration work on why you don't like that placement and why you might dislike it. It was notable the number of Capricorns who liked Sidereal or True Sky better because now they're not Capricorns anymore.
That's
So
interesting.
Anyway. Very interesting. This Capricorn thing keeps coming up. Right. So now, the other thing is a lot of people say that they find True Sky astrology to be more spiritually oriented or a higher vibration, in the chat. It's more soulful. And I totally see why people feel that way, because tropical astrology and sidereal astrology were very focused on helping you with life on the planet, right? Like, should you marry this person? What is wrong with your health? How can you be financially better? Like, will your kids, survive to maturity? Should you move somewhere? Is there going to be a flood? Like, those two astrology systems are very focused on life here on Earth and dealing with the planets. And I saw this funny thing on Threads, which was basically like, no king paid the court astrologer to tell him how he felt. Right? The king wants to know, am I going to win this battle? Is there going to be a famine?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really great that True Sky astrology gives people sort of like the higher ethereal, soulful vibe. But I would say that I would beware of gravitating to it so that you can then escape dealing with your actual physical problems on the planet. Right? I don't want a True Sky to be like the escape hatch where you're like, okay, I'm now an ascended being and I no longer have to deal with my kids' crap or deal with the laundry or, focus on the fact that my husband and I haven't said more than good morning to each other in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I just say that I have a ton of spiritual energy and I'm very higher vibration. And my spirit guides are always like, Robin, you are here. You are here on this planet. And I got into astrology because I needed help with life issues. And I will say that I think that tropical and sidereal are really great for that. They're really great for things like, why am I not succeeding at work? Or how come I'm so lonely and feel like my friends never have time for me? Or did I get a dog?
Is this person a match? I see that question a lot, especially when I watch international dramas. That's the big thing. They go to the matchmaker and they see if both people's charts make sense together.
Yeah, right. I just did a horror question for somebody who got a marriage proposal and wanted ideas about, is this a good idea or not, right? So I don't want to say that because True Sky astrology is more soulful or a higher vibration, or it's feels ascended, that is necessarily better. I think it's good. And if you want to feel soulful and ascended and you love that, go for you. But people often say that, I heard somebody say who was like, well, tropical astrology is the astrology of the ego and True Sky is the astrology of the soul. And I'm like, there's a reason we have egos. And I think that in the metaphysical world, we can get into this sort of subtly bashing our physical incarnation because we want to, be soulful and evolved or whatever. And I just think this is why all three systems are good.
All right. Well, Desiree is reminding us about the question on, and I'm going to butcher it, Ophiuchus.
Ophiuchus, yeah, Ophiuchus. Right? Here's the thing is that the zodiac signs in sidereal and tropical, there are 12 zodiac signs. But if you actually look at the belt of the sun, which is called the ecliptic, that's the astronomical term, that's the path of the sun. And those are the constellations that the zodiac signs were named after. There's sort of a gap between Scorpio, which is a little bitty sign, and then Sagittarius. And in tropical and sidereal, you go right from Scorpio to Sagittarius. But if you actually look at the ecliptic, there's this little spot right between the two, and it is a constellation called Ophiuchus. That's the name of that constellation. And the reason we're not familiar with it is that everybody knows the 12 names from the Zodiac, and that one was not included when they set up the system. Partly because 12 is a much better number to work with when you have 4 elements and 3 modalities.
It was the mathematicians. They did it.
Yes. Yay for math. Thank you, mathematicians. So, yeah. So So Ophiuchus is a sign. The constellation symbol, I think, is a man like sort of wrangling two snakes. And it's associated with like healing or like overcoming challenges. And so some true sky astrologers, not all, but some, have included now when they have 13 signs, and the 13th one is Ophiuchus. And it is, I think it's great. I don't think there's any dangerous thing for studying any of these, as long as you do so with common sense and don't get sucked into a rabbit hole that makes you like sell your home and move to Antarctica if that's not really good for you. So Ophiuchus is a sign, if you have placements there or if there are transits going through there, that people associate with like healing energy and sort of like leveling up and that sort of stuff. So yeah, so it's just it's an extra sign, and if you think it's important for the intuition or the interpretation that you're doing, I say go for it. I'm always a more is more person. I think anybody should work with whatever is helping them in their path and it appeals to their intuition.
I wanted to bring up a question from Dean. And the question is there, and I think a lot of people that are possibly new, right, or being introduced to the topic of astrology might have. And the question is there any danger in studying this or using it as a guide?
It's a really good question, and I appreciate that. I think it's an important question because it is easy to get swept away by other people's enthusiasms. So I think that there are two potential dangers that you just have to watch out for. Now, this is not a reason to do it. Obviously, my sister was like, "Why have you devoted your life to astrology when nobody understands how it works?" And I'm like, that's why people devote their lives to things. Like nobody understood how DNA worked until Watson and Crick figured it out. Like, we're all working on understanding this, right? So, so the one danger is if you learn something new, like you're listening to me and you're like, oh, Ophiuchus, oh, there's a 13th sign, or, oh my gosh, wait, I'm not a Leo. Wait, I'm actually a Cancer. That's a danger. If it derails your sense of self, if it makes you start to doubt, like this happened to me when I went down this rabbit hole, because people were like, I've just realized tropical astrology is wrong and it's a trap. And I'm like, oh no. What about all the people that my spirit guides were like, Robin, you have helped thousands of clients and they love you. This person has relocated 13 charts and now they're announcing that all of tropical astrology is wrong. Like, you know what I mean? Like take in new information and consider how it can be helpful to you, but don't get derailed. Don't let other people's anxieties or enthusiasms knock you out of your own center. You know, I really feel like it's sort of like going to like an Indian buffet and seeing a dish that you've never seen before. And you're like, oh, that's kind of smells sort of interesting. You take a small portion on your plate and you take a delicate taste.
Yes.
And you see, oh, I like this. Oh, this is helpful. Oh, like this. Oh, wait, I could think of myself as a Leo in the sidereal system. Oh, that makes so much sense, right? Or like, I don't know, maybe that's a little spicy. That, I don't know, like there's been a bunch of things where I was like, I don't think that's very important. And then like 2 years later, it's like the center of my practice, you know? So I feel like danger is if you approach this in a way where you like outsource your authority to other people, you know, email I saw in threads, they were like, well, I pulled up my chart in one system, it said it was in the 10th house. And in the other system, it said the planet was in the 9th house. And I don't know who to trust. And I'm like, okay, it's probably in both the 10th and the 9th, depending on what system. And the answer is trust yourself. Right. So don't go away, just keep your head about you, see what feels helpful and useful. And then the other danger is you find something you love, and then you start squashing the people who are using whatever it is that you have moved away from. Right. Where you're like, oh, I never understood myself until I looked at my sidereal chart. The tropical chart was just a version of me that was like the patriarchy trying to suck me in. You know, if you want to be liberated, you should check out your sidereal. And I'm like, okay. That for me now has begun to sound like, because this is my path and I'm excited, I think everybody else should be on the same path as me.
Yes.
And I think that's a danger. Just looking at the threads, looking at what's out there, you know, like there's this article that was like, why your astrology sign is probably wrong from somebody who would know. And the somebody who would know turned out to be an astronomer. And they said, astrology implies that all of the constellations are 30 degrees wide. That's not true. And I'm like, astrology does not imply that the constellations are 30 degrees wide, because astrologers know that the zodiac signs are not the same as the constellations. As an astronomer, perhaps you don't know that, but that means you're not somebody who would know. Right?
Yes.
So I feel like that's a big thing. Yes, like a buffet, exactly, right? But take what works for you. And part of that's important because we are trained in our school system to outsource authority, right? Like, you don't write the essay that's right for you. You listen to the teacher and you write the essay the teacher wants. And
Oh
unfortunately,
my
people
gosh,
come
that's so true. Yes.
people come to metaphysics with the same problem. Who should I trust? Well, you should trust yourself, right? I read online that my sign is wrong. No, probably written by an astronomer. A reputable astrologer, sign up for my email list and email me back and ask me what to say. So that's the other danger, is if you get to the point where you're like, I love this. Like, there's this Marge Simpsons episode where somebody's brought cage fighting to Springfield. And Marge starts a campaign against cage fighting. And what she says is, because this is not to my taste, I don't believe anybody else should have the chance to enjoy it either.
So true. So true. Yes. And, I just want to share, because I know sometimes the chat moves pretty quickly, but there are a lot of people that are really vibing with your style and how you deliver the message, which is, again, one of the many favorite things about you. So it seems like our friend Dean may be, and this happens to a lot of people, on a spiritual journey, or maybe they're kind of exploring and seeing what's out there. So, follow-up question from Dean: how does this correspond to the Bible?
Oh, okay. I love talking about the Bible and astrology. So that's a really excellent question. So the idea that you're following the stars and that you are drawing interpretations or advice from the stars is ubiquitous across human cultures around the globe, going back in history. So there are a lot of mentions in the Old Testament about not worshiping the stars and not following astrology. And there's a rule in sort of like ethnography and history, which is that anytime there are a lot of prescriptions against doing something, that means a lot of people were doing it, right?
So true.
Yeah. So the fact that the Old Testament talks so much about not worshiping the stars and not getting drawn away by astrology means that those people were consulting astrologers and looking at the stars a lot. And the spiritual authorities of their day were like, don't get drawn away from following God and, doing what it is that we're supposed to be doing by this star stuff. So this is important because one of the things about astrology is it's very individualized, and it sort of empowers anybody who can see the stars to like make their own interpretation. And the Old Testament wasn't necessarily so pro on people going off and making their own interpretation. And there's scriptures actually about like, don't go off your own way. Don't abandon our religion, right? So it doesn't necessarily say that like astrology is against the Bible, but what it does say is you shouldn't worship the stars and you shouldn't use astrology as a reason or an excuse to do things that go against the like treating people the way that you should, right? God says we should love the poor, we should forgive people's debts, we should exercise mercy, we should harbor the alien and the stranger. Astrology is not a reason to not do any of those things. And I think that that's actually still true for us today, because there's ways to interpret astrology that say that you're the king of the universe and it's right for you to do whatever you want and not treat other people in a loving way. So it's not an excuse to do other things. Now, the New Testament says nothing about astrology. So the Christian Bible, the Christian portion of the New Testament, has nothing to say about astrologers. But there are two important things to know about them. And one is that the wise men were astrologers, right? They say a new star has come into the east, and the star is telling us a king has been born, and we've followed the stars, and now here we are in Bethlehem to witness the birth of the Christ.
Yes.
Like that's astrology.
Yes, like
would
what
you
else
notice
would
if
you
a new
even call
star?
that? Like what else would you
Right.
even call that?
Very obviously astrology. Nobody else would notice a new star in the east, especially back in the day, because you could see way more stars because they didn't have artificial lighting. Right. But the other thing is that the Greek word that's used to describe the wise men is magus or magus, which is where we get the word like magic. You might have heard of the three magi. In some cultures, they have the day of the magi. And magus was a word for like a wise and learned advisor. And they all studied astrology. Like that was part of the basic curriculum. So the wise men were astrologers, and their knowledge of astrology led them to Jesus. But then there's another guy in the Bible called Simon the sorcerer. Now, it's interesting that the wise men are translated as wise men, and the Simon the sorcerer is translated as sorcerer, but the Greek word is actually the same. The
Ooh.
wise men are magi, and it's really Simon Magus. He's also a mage or a magus.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually a bad guy in the Bible because he goes to the apostles and he says, you guys are doing miracles. Can I pay you money so that I can have this power too? And that's taken as sort of an indication that his like motives aren't the greatest because he wants to pay them. So now he can be a powerful guy and then he can make money. And the wise men are the good guys because their astrology leads them to Christ. And Simon the sorcerer is a bad guy because he's basically power hungry and focused on money. Which I also think is a good lesson, right? If you are using your astrology to advance your spiritual journey, to find your higher self, to treat other people well, to heal your wounds, to honor what should be given honor in the world, and I think the Bible has a thumbs up for that. If you're using your astrology because you just want to make money and gain more power and like climb over the backs of other people, I think the Bible gives that a thumbs down. Mm-hmm. So my ultimate belief on the astrology in general and the Bible in general is that astrology is like any human tool, right? Like, I don't know if you know this, but more children are killed by swimming pools than by gun violence. But we like swimming pools because swimming pools are amazing. Like automobiles can be used for amazing purposes and horrible purposes. And I think astrology in itself is a neutral tool, and it's up to us to figure out what we want to do with it.
Gosh, that's such a great point because everything goes back to discernment, having discernment over what you're practicing and why. You know, a lot of people feel a certain kind of way about a tarot deck, right? But this is just paper. What matters, I feel, is the intention behind your reading, the intention that you put into it as you're working with it, because it is a tool. It is a tool. The cards by itself don't do don't do anything. You know, it's how you use them. Yes. And that is true for so many different things. I love that example. So, Dean, hopefully that has answered your question. Yes, beautiful. Your knowledge is well rounded, he says. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully I did not derail you with the questions. I know that you wanted to make sure to hit on a few things today, and I'm happy. And we do have some friends that have joined and some friends that had to leave, and hopefully they'll come back and watch the replay. But thank you all so much for being here.
I'm honestly happy to keep going.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Because I have a few more things to talk about and people have shown up. So if you want to keep going, I'm happy to do that.
That would be great. Yes, yes.
Okay, all right. I don't want to force anybody to hang around, but and I appreciate the question about the Bible. I spent 25 years in a Christian church. And then when I started doing astrology, I thought a lot about the Bible and what it had to say. And I went back and looked at the Greek scriptures. I learned to read actually ancient Greek so that I could understand the Bible in the original.
Whoa.
Which was fascinating.
Ange says, keep going. Oh my God, I'm loving this.
Okay, that's great.
Hello, Ramon, and welcome.
And part of the reason I want to keep going is that I feel like we sort of haven't gotten to all the pros and cons of the systems, and I want to give them all an even thing. But I will say that I have no problem being derailed to answer questions because I love this, and I have 5 planets in mutable signs. So I worked with teenagers for 20 years. So I'm perfectly good at like derailing to answer a question and coming back. Okay. Oh yeah, so true sky astrology is great for going outside, for using your eyeballs, for observing the sky, for getting another perspective on your chart, for incorporating Ophiuchus, which I think is a really cool constellation, for giving you another perspective on your chart, right? Sidereal astrology, which is mostly practiced by yeah, I need one of those. It's mostly practiced in the Indian subcontinent. Vedic astrology is mostly sidereal, although not entirely. And I think the best thing about sidereal astrology is that it comes with the thousands of years of wisdom of astrology in India. And those people have stuff that I don't even do, like nakshatras and like there's all these things. It's an incredible tradition. And I love the fact that they really are very overt about linking spirituality to astrological practice. So there are stories of great astrologers who would like meditate and pray for 3 hours in the morning, work with clients for 4 hours in the afternoon, and then go back and meditate and pray for another 3 hours after dinner. And it was like, there's this belief that actually the power of astrology is not calculating all the symbols or creating all the charts. It's tapping into wisdom sources, which I will say has been transformative for me. My astrology, I had to take 2.5 years off because my spirit guides forced me to take a sabbatical. And I came back so much more in tune with my intuition, so much more sort of on the same page with myself spiritually. So I think sidereal astrology is really cool because you can then access all of these Vedic techniques, which is amazing. And then the other thing is that you can actually create a sidereal chart for Western astrology as well. And if you just go to astro.com and you go to horoscope drawings and data and extended chart selection, there's a little button and you can redo your chart in sidereal. And that sometimes is really helpful. And I will say that at the beginning of my astrology journey, I spent time comparing the two. And what I found is that tropical astrology really reflected sort of people's like intentions and what they were trying to achieve and their own inner state and their own goals. But sidereal astrology was great at sort of explaining what happened. And so the analogy I gave to people is like, let's say your friend calls you up in a panic and is like, oh my gosh, my son's birthday party is tomorrow, but the bakery can't supply the cake. Can you make a cake? And you're like, okay, I'll bake a cake overnight and I'll bring it to your son's birthday party. And the next day you bring this cake that you made and people are like, oh, this is an amazing cake. This is so delicious. Oh, I love your creativity. This is the most beautiful cake I've ever seen. So the tropical is the Virgo, where you're solving the problem for your friend. But the sidereal is 23 degrees behind. And now that's the Leo, where the effect is that people saw your creativity, they saw your self-expression, you found an audience, people see your passion for baking. So you can actually use the two of them together to talk about sort of like intentions and goals and then actual effect. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's partly their sidereal chart. They're like, oh, I'm also a Leo. I am a Virgo in the tropical system, but a lot of us Virgos have these Leo underpinnings. And my personal theory is that this gap of 23 degrees, which is the difference now between the tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac, has something to do with the quality of our culture, where we're uncovering and discovering these new parts of ourselves. Because it's almost 30 degrees, which means it's almost into the next sign. So that's my theory on how the two systems go together.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of buzz in the chat. Loving how you are articulating everything. Yes, and I always appreciated that about you because I always felt like she says things in a way that I can understand. I love your examples. I always do. Hey,
Thank you. Thank
John,
you.
welcome to the chat. Clavis, happy to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
All righty.
Well, thank you for your compliments. I really appreciate that. What I'm working on is trying to feel better about my communication because I have a lot of insecurities about that. So when people like help me understand that my communication is good, that's really healing to me. So thanks for that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Do you want to answer Dean's question about why I decided to follow astrology over Christianity?
Yes,
or
let's
should we
do that because I do find these fascinating. Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, then we'll get to the pros of tropical. which I'll
First
get
of
to.
all,
Okay.
Dean, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for posing your questions. For it lets me know that you feel safe and comfortable in this environment, posing the question, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm happy to answer this question, but I want to make sure that my answer is not taken as like telling other people what they should do or saying that my path is right for other people's path. Okay. Because I think actually that Christianity has many benefits, and I was in a Christian church for 25 years, and people loved me and cared about me, and I learned about spirituality, and learning to read the Bible in Greek was life-changing. So the fact that I sort of ended my Christian path and then have switched now to something that's a little bit different is not intending to say that other people should not be part of churches or whatever. So I realized at some point that Jesus left his spiritual path, right? So Jesus was a Jew, and he was going to temple, and he, was viewed as a rabbi by many people. So he was obviously well-versed in his religion. And then something happened to him. We don't really know exactly what, but he started hearing from God somehow. He said, whatever I've heard from my Father is what I pass on to you. And then he started talking about the things he was hearing. And all of a sudden, he didn't fit so well in his home religion, because he was criticizing people for doing things wrong. And he was like, well, I know you guys think this is what tithing is, but actually it's something completely different. And by the way, tithing is not the most important because it's not an excuse to mistreat other people. And all of a sudden, it's like his path had diverged, and he just wasn't welcome there. And the Jewish religion has continued, and many people are Jewish. And actually, my dad's family is Jewish, so I have Jewish ancestry. But it wasn't right for Jesus, because what he was hearing was now no longer a good fit for the system that he had grown up in. Mm-hmm. And I will say, at the risk of saying that I'm also like Jesus, they tell you you should be like Jesus, but then when you start actually acting like Jesus, they don't like you anymore. I'm like, I can see why Jesus left. So I had sort of an awakening, and I started hearing from my spirit guides in a much more overt way. And all of a sudden I started sharing what I was hearing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm finally hearing the voice of spirit. This is great. And people around me were just not that excited, because it was uncomfortable for them. And some of the things that they had grown up doing were not what I was hearing. And I started sort of speaking my truth and calling out that a lot of the things that my church was doing were not actually from the Bible. They just said they were from the Bible. It doesn't mean they were bad, but they were like saying, well, we do this because this is biblical, and everybody should do this because this is biblical. And I'm like, that's not actually what the Bible said. And actually, there's a bunch of things my church was doing that were in the Bible that they weren't doing. And so I just sort of felt like I didn't want to destabilize the structure, because I thought that people were enjoying that. And so I just went out on my own. And I still talk to my spirit guides all the time, and I still think about the Bible, and I still use the Greek, and I still talk to the Holy Spirit, and I, still am on a spiritual path, but it's just like my path became too individualized to be comfortable within the structure of the Christian church. That's sort of the short answer. But I think the Bible's full of wisdom. And so I thought a lot about why the Bible said, here's some dangers about astrology. And then I worked hard to make sure that I didn't fall into those dangers, like worshiping the stars instead of treating other people well, or using astrology as an excuse to just do what I wanted without thinking about other people, or getting sucked in by lures of power and money, So yeah, okay. That's why I diverged.
I think it all goes back to, to discernment, right? Like just exploring where you feel like you have questions, and doing your due diligence, doing the research, taking time to think on things, to meditate on things, to pray about things, and doing what is in alignment with yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. Althea is running off, but loves you and sub to your channel, and she's coming back later to listen to the rest of it. So thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it was sort of devastating for me, because I had been in the church for 25 years. I met my husband there. And I said to my spirit guides after I left, I'm like, because I was sort of grieving, right? I lost my community. And I was like, why did you make me join the church if I just was going to have to leave? And they said, well, the church for you, not for others, just for me, was sort of like a spiritual incubator in some sense. I didn't grow up with a spiritual practice, and the people in the church were very kind and they loved me and they helped me heal from some difficult things from my childhood. And I learned to read the Bible and I learned to pray and I learned to think about higher things, which I just never had any training in that. And so they were like, you learned a lot from there. But then once you started to diverge on your path, the people who had trained you were not the people who were going to continue to support you going off in this new direction.
Yes, it was like you needed that part in order to help grow and develop you and prepare you for what your
Right.
plan was down the road. Because if I
Yep.
remember correctly, I feel like I remember that you grew up in the family that was not very spiritual.
Mhm. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah. Not even not spiritual, but actually sort of anti-spiritual, like saying, well, that's all made up and those people are just charlatans and they just want your money and it's just people's imagination. And, one family member was like, well, I just think spirituality is like 90% human invented. And I'm like,
Mm.
yeah. And some people, the path might be the opposite, right? They go off on their own. And then later in life, they come back and find the church. I've met people like that who were like, I spent my younger years doing my own thing. And then in my later years, now I'm finding this community. And I think that also is beautiful. But I agree with what you say about discernment, because this is the one thing I think that in at least the society I grew up in, that was 1970s California, they were very determined to break the connection between you and your own authority and knowledge.
Hmm.
Determined to get you to listen to like the factory owner, right? Or the teacher or the coach. And so understanding like what is actually good for you is I think, a lifelong lesson. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. I mean, we have to remember that everyone that is here has their own path. They're on their own journey, and we cannot sit and compare ourselves to the other people around us. Like, we're here and we interact like in bubbles and we learn and pick up things from other people, but it doesn't mean that we should be walking the same exact path as the person next to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that helped me with that was when I realized that actually we've all been here before and we will all be here again. So like maybe in your last lifetime, you were doing exactly what that person over there that you now are incredibly pissed off by is doing. Right. And maybe in their next lifetime, they're going to be doing what you're doing. Like we've all been the mystic, we've all been the conventional person, we've all been the queen, we've all been the pauper, we've all been the go-go business person, we've all been the like leper at the bottom of society. Like, we have these experiences. And so it's almost like everybody's reading a different chapter,
Mhm.
of the book, whatever that is. Okay. All right. Can I get to the pros of tropical astrology?
Yes.
We veer back. Okay.
Mhm.
So True Sky is great for a new constellation, Ophiuchus, eyeball observation, and also just providing a different view of your chart. Sidereal is great because it provides a different view of your chart, which may be more sort of outward or results focused, depending on how you think about that. Plus, you get Vedic astrology, which is huge and an awesome and a great tradition. And then tropical, which is what my spirit guides said I should use. I was disappointed because I was hoping that they would tell me to use True Sky astrology, which seemed way cooler with my strong Sagittarius. I'm like, stars. But they were like, no, tropical. And I'm like, tropical felt like the Capricorn of astrology systems. Like the accountant of astrology, like the banker of astrology systems. But here's the cool thing about tropical systems. So I at first rejected predictive astrology because my pattern is always to reject every good idea. I just reject everything that later becomes important. And so I insisted that I never wanted to do predictive astrology.
That's so funny.
Of course, my spirit guides had other plans. Um, so I got diagnosed as bipolar when I was a young person, and I am not bipolar, but I do have these ups and downs of energy. And so I needed to learn to predict the energetic ups and the energetic downs so that I could warn my family, let my husband know, not schedule any big things. And tropical astrology is terrific for prediction. And this gets back to why people invented this artificial 30-degree zodiac in the beginning. Like people could see the constellations. Like, why was there a need to invent this other thing? And the answer is because if you have 30 degrees exactly and you pin it to the equinox every time, you now have a prediction like genius system. Okay, so just to give an example, I have my Mars at 21 degrees Virgo. And what I know from analyzing my own chart and analyzing other people's charts with accidents and illnesses is that if my Mars is over here, every time, when I say my Mars, it's like the Mars in my natal chart. So the day I was born, it was at 21 Virgo, right on the descendant. Anytime Mars gets to 90 degrees in the sky in the zodiac, so 90 degrees up here from my Mars, this makes sense. Like, imagine I'm drawing a circle here. This is my chart. Okay.
Yes.
So 90 degrees here. So this is my Mars. Anytime Mars gets to 90 degrees here or 90 degrees down here, that is a trouble spot for me.
Oh.
That is a spot where I'm going to be in a lot of pain. I'm going to be discouraged. I'm not going to be feeling well. I'm going to feel like life isn't worth living. I'm just going to be like mopey. I'm going to snap at my husband. And this is true for everybody, where 90 degrees to your Mars is just not a good spot. Now, my chart, it's actually a really terrible spot. But for most people, that's a time when you get into an accident, you get injured, you have a fight with somebody, you know, you have a miscommunication at work. It's always a trouble zone, right? So one thing we'd like to be able to do, and the ancient astrologers were very focused on this, is predict when Mars is going to be at these 290-degree trouble spots, because you want to put that on the calendar and you want to tell the king, hey, don't go to war during this period, or prepare for an invasion, or as one of my friends said, like, don't go roller skating, you're accident prone on these days, right? Don't climb up a high ladder. And of course, in astrology, you want to be able to predict where the danger is going to come from. Is it an airborne danger? Is it a communication danger? Is it a, you know, like a physical trauma of some sort, right? So the way that we do that in astrology is that I know my Virgo, my Mars is at 21 Virgo. And I know that 90 degrees is exactly 21 Sagittarius and 21 Gemini. Super simple, right? Well, it's exactly the same degree. It's exactly the signs that are the right angle. I can look at my chart and literally like see the 90-degree angle right there. I can go right to the astro calculator and I can literally type in Mars 21 degrees Gemini and it brings up a calendar. And it's like, on this day, it's going to be a 21 Gemini. On this day, it's going to be a 21. On this day, it's going to be a 21.
Wow.
I go to my calendar, I put that in. And then when those days come up, I'm like, oh, here's the tricky period. Let me warn my family. Let me let my husband know. Let me not schedule any live events and just give myself permission to lie in bed all morning if that's what I want to do. Let me schedule plenty of happy things like, you know, extra ice cream. Math. Okay. Now, this is why math is so great, because it's so simple. This is why they did this. Okay. So if I try to do this in true sky, my Mars in true sky is like, I think it's at like 37 degrees of Leo. And then I have to actually count, because all the signs are like different degrees and widths. So I have to literally count the 90 degrees. And I think the 90 degrees is at like, it's at like 31 degrees of Taurus and then like 8 degrees of Ophiuchus. Maybe, but it's sort of hard to tell because the signs don't start at an exact degree point. It's not like they start at 0 and end at 30 the way they do in tropical. So you're sort of like trying to figure out what this is. But then it's even harder than that, because like the nice thing about tropical astrology is that there's this great sacred geometry where it's like, I've got a mutable sign, which is a sign about endings. And then Gemini and Sagittarius are exactly opposite each other. And it's a fire sign and an air sign. So you can see how they work together. But now, instead of this nice fire and air opposition, which is a nice, you know, we know that fire and air are compatible elements. I now have Taurus, which is an earth sign, and Ophiuchus, which doesn't really have any element because it's the 13th sign. So there's no element associated with it. And then if I get rid of Ophiuchus, I now have Sagittarius, which is an air and an earth, which the whole system just kind of falls apart at that point. It's
Mm-hmm.
much harder to figure out the 90 degrees. It's much harder to count them all. And then the elemental things sort of break down. So I feel like this is the reason that they didn't just go with the constellations back in the day. Like the reason they came up with this 30-degree thing is it makes it much easier to predict when things are going to happen and to understand how to work with the energies. So let's go back to this Gemini Sagittarius opposition, right? So I'm working with a couple, and when you combine their two charts, they have a Gemini Sagittarius opposition. So the man has the Gemini moon and the woman has the Sagittarius moon. And I can tell them that these actually are compatible because one is fire and one is air, so they go together. Plus, they're both mutable signs, so they're both very flexible. They're both good at endings, but it's like a teeter-totter. You have to go back and forth. You do the Gemini thing, you do the Sagittarius thing. And if you do that, the energy, this is key, the energy of each will propel the other. It's like on a teeter-totter at the playground where the person goes up and then as they come down, they push the other one up. Now, I don't think that oppositions are bad. And it would be bad if you had a Taurus Sagittarius opposition because those signs have nothing in common.
Mm-hmm.
But in the tropical system, you now have Sagittarius and Gemini, and both of those signs have the same type of energy and they are compatible elements. So there's a lot to be said for the tropical system. Like I now see why my spirit guide said I should do tropical because I could help more people with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way the elements and the way that the qualities of the signs go together provide many more solutions than the true sky astrology, where the signs are all different widths. And so the oppositions and the squares don't match up in a way that actually that provides the same type of interpretive detail.
Mm. That's
Right?
so interesting.
It is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then there's one other thing, and I will credit my spirit guides for this because I did not come up with this. They suggested this to me. Because the thing is, this is true of sidereal astrology as well. It's got the same 30-degree elements. It works with the oppositions. It works with the squares. You can do the very same thing where, like, my Mars isn't at 21 Virgo. I think it ends up being at like 28 Leo. But I could still do the same square where I've got the 28. I guess that would be Leo, and then would it be Aquarius? Yeah, 28 Scorpio. Anyway, so sidereal astrology has the same angle thing going for it. Okay, but when it comes to making long-range predictions, there is a problem with sidereal astrology. So because tropical astrology has pinned the zodiac to 0 degrees Aries at the equinox point, you can do very long-range predictions and still be using the exact same zodiac. Now, if I'm doing predictions for my lifetime, I might live 90 years. So I'm looking only at a 1 degree slip over 90 years. But let's say I want to do predictions for the city of Baghdad, right? That was founded, I don't know, but 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I want to do predictions for the United States, which is now 240 something years old. I now have to, if I'm in the sidereal system, I now have to figure out how much slippage has happened over the course of those years or 240 years or whatever it is. And here's the thing is that the sidereal people don't agree on this. This is part of what's challenging. When people say, oh, it's a distortion, I'm like, yes, they're all distortions because we're all making these interpretive decisions. So there are actually 9 different ayanamshas, I believe. And I'm not an expert on this, so if somebody else wants to correct me, but my understanding is that there are 9 different ideas about where the zodiac actually should be starting. And most of them are only 2 to 4 degrees off, but 2 to 4 degrees can make a difference if you're looking at something that's right on the edge of one of the signs. And in fact, there was so much disagreement that at one point the Indian government had to step in and officially rubber stamp one of the ayanamshas, which is this gap between them. And then if you're looking at something that happened 1,000 years ago, and now you're looking at trying to make predictions for the city, you then have to do some much more complex math to figure out where the ayanamsha would have been 1,000 years ago. And then, so where's the Mars square for this 1,000-year-old city now?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's not a reason not to use sidereal astrology. But when we're looking at the pros of tropical, one of the reasons that astrologers came down on the side of tropical astrology is that it is very simple to make accurate predictions about where the planets are going to be. And you got to remember that all of this was being done in the days before computers. Like, it's pretty easy for us now to do true sky astrology because we have technology that allows us to map the constellations, and we can look at fixed stars, and there's these great systems that people have. But back in the day, it was not easy to predict where Mars was going to be in, 200 years. And so they chose this very simple mathematical system because it allowed them to get laser accurate predictions.
Wow. Yes.
The best of their mathematical abilities. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Now, I know, right? So you could look at that and be like, well, bully for them, right? Of course, they wanted a simple system because they didn't have computers and their math wasn't as sophisticated as our math. Why should we still be using that system? Now that we have computers, we should just be using this, these other systems. And the answer is that because this was the system that they developed, they've been working on it now for 2,000 years. And it is an amazing freaking system. So even though we don't have to use it because we could have much more precise astronomical, data, we do have computers, they spent 2,000 years figuring out amazing things you can do with the system. And as one Threads person said, there's no evidence that like astrological predictions have been getting less accurate as the gap with the stars has increased. So part of the reason that the system is still in use, even though we now don't need it because we have more sophisticated math, is that it's a great system because those people were brilliant astrologers, and 2,000 years of brilliant astrologers working on any system will make it great. And I'm sure that True Sky is going to be an amazing system in 2,000 years.
Yes.
If people are still working on it. And I hope they are, because I think it's a really cool system.
Oh, yes. That makes all the sense in the world. Oh, I love that.
Yep.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When you were looking at where you could live that would be an area where you could thrive as a person, in conjunction, because you're not alone, right? So in conjunction with your husband, what system did you use to determine that?
Yeah. So I used the tropical system
Okay.
to determine that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely used the tropical system to determine that. And I will say, by the way, for those of you who are signed up for my mailing list on my website, which is spiritsaid.com, spiridsaid.com, that today I am, Steve and I, my husband, are recording a lecture where we go through 3 chart examples. We're using Steve's chart, and we actually explain how the chart shows why one place is a better place for Steve to live and another place is a worse place for Steve to live. So if you want to see this in action, you can sign up for my mailing list and you'll get a copy of that video, and you can see how I use the chart, how the tropical system works, how we evaluate the lot of fortune and the planets on the angles. Okay, now that said, I think if I were a sidereal astrologer, I probably could have done something with that chart as well. So I think that system would probably also work, but I would have to experiment with that. And part of that is true because there are some things that all 3 systems will be the same. So for example, the aspects between the planets, which is the angles between the planets, those are going to be the same in any system you choose. If your sun and moon are 120 degrees apart, that will stay no matter what system you use.
Mm-hmm.
Your angle between your ascendant and the planets is also going to be the same. So like at the moment of my birth, my Jupiter's on my midheaven, my Saturn's on my bottom, and then my cluster, my Virgo cluster's right on the descendant from my relationships. No matter what system I use, that geometry between the planets and my birth time is going to also be the same. So it's not like you're throwing out everything and everything will be completely different. And I finally escaped from that horrible moon, because it's like, nope, the moon's still there. It's in a different sign. Maybe it has a different ruler, but you are you and you are you. And I've noticed that Desiree said that a sign can straddle 2 houses in constellational astrology. And I will say that actually is also true in tropical and sidereal astrology. It's very common for a sign to straddle 2 houses. Now, in constellational astrology, sometimes it straddles 2 houses because it's like 50 degrees. And so it can straddle 2 or even 3 houses, which is another way that the oppositions are a little bit difficult, because I think in my chart, I discovered that Virgo is opposed by 3 different signs.
Mm.
So in my tropical chart, I have a Virgo Pisces opposition, which everybody has that opposition in their chart. But in the true sky astrology, the constellational astrology, you get one big sign and it can oppose multiple, or maybe it's Taurus. I think it's Taurus that opposes 3 different signs. So it's not quite as clear cut
That's
for
a
something
big
like that.
one. Taurus is a big one.
It is. Yeah, it is a big one. Yeah. So it's very common that a sign will straddle 2 houses. And people always ask, like, well, which one should I pick? You know, which house is it? And the answer is it's both. So most houses and most charts are sort of a mix of energies. Unless you're using whole sign houses, which is another great house system, and that simplifies things. My spirit guides told me I should start with whole sign house system because it was simpler. And then I've sort of gravitated up to more complex house systems since then. So yeah. Yeah, but I used tropical. I don't find that there's anything that tropical doesn't work for, but I also know that there are techniques in the Vedic Indian astrology system that I don't know about. That I don't know if tropical would work for all of their techniques or not.
Mm-hmm. I'm flabbergasted at how much you do know, woman. Give yourself credit. Like you know
Pat on my
so
head,
much.
pat on the
I'm
head
like,
to my spirit
how does
guides.
she store all that information in there?
Well, you know, this is why, like, if we go back to Dean's question about, is it spiritual? I wouldn't know this much if I hadn't brought my spiritual connection in, because a lot of this stuff is stuff that my spirit guides are like poking me.
Mm,
Can we answer Desiree's question about what is Hellenistic astrology?
yes.
Yeah, I love the Q&A because as you can see, I'm passionate about. Also, I love answering questions, to be frank. I love being the person. Anyway, so Hellenistic astrology. Okay, Claire, I see your question. We'll get there in a second. So Hellenistic astrology, Hellenistic as a word basically refers to things that were developed in ancient Greece. And in general, in sort of the ancient Mediterranean area, because the Hellenistic, they sort of like their effect spread over the whole sort of Mediterranean area. So Hellenistic astrology is a set of techniques that were developed largely in ancient Greece, but they weren't developed so much by the Greeks as they were sort of tweaked by the Greeks. So the basic substrate of this astrology that we're talking about started in Mesopotamia, so Babylon, Assyria. Then it sort of migrated into Greece, and then it also migrated into India, and then it migrated into Egypt, and there was this sort of like stew, like a cauldron of influences. And then what happens is that the Greeks were brilliant writers, and they loved to write things down, and they loved to write books on the systems of how things worked. So they sort of took all of these different influences and they combined them into a system, which then moved into the Middle East during the Middle Ages, because the Christian Middle Ages were very sort of anti-astrology and a lot of this knowledge was lost. So Hellenistic astrology refers to the sort of systems of like, it's the 12 sign zodiac that we know, but there's systems about rulership and detriment, which are super amazing and helpful. They developed techniques for like determining how long you were gonna live. And they wrote a lot of stuff down, which was then translated into Arabic, and medieval Arabic language astrologers worked on it. So Hellenistic astrology is basically like the astrology of Greece and Rome, which was a Mesopotamian foundation that the Greeks put their sort of quasi-scientific magic into and developed into a very crisp and well-delineated system. They lost a few things in doing this, by the way, because they switched the planets from the Babylonian Mesopotamian gods over to the Greek gods. And so Venus originally used to be associated with war because she was associated with Ishtar, the goddess of war, and then that dropped off. And now she got associated with Aphrodite, who's all like love and sex and, you know, beautiful food. And then she got associated with the Roman Venus, but we lost the sort of fierce femininity aspect of Venus. And I will say, by the way, that the articles that Elizabeth read for me are on my Patreon, and they talk about that. So if you want to check out my Patreon, which is Spirit Said, all one word, you can see those articles. I think you just have to become a member for free, and they're available, or maybe even, you might even not have to become a member. So you can check.
Yeah, so I'll check that out and I'll make sure to add the link to the description box so that our friends can find it easily.
Yeah. Okay, so can I answer Claire's question?
Yes, that was a great question. So the constellation as we know it today the same 100 years ago or even 250 years ago. So, for example, her Nan was an Aries cusp in 1920.
Okay. So the answer is that 100 or 250 years ago, the constellation would look roughly the same. The stars do move very slowly, background stars, the constellations, but not too far. So the constellation would look just about the same, but its position relative to the sun's equinox point would be different. So it's like it's moved in the background backwards by, if it's 100 years, it's moved by like 1 degree and maybe 20 minutes. And 250 years, it's moved by like 3.5 degrees. Now, if you say your Nan was an Aries cusp in 1920, we have to ask what system you're using. So if that's a tropical astrology system, then she was an Aries cusp, which means she was probably her sun. I'm not sure what you mean when you say an Aries cusp, but if her sun's on the cusp of Aries, that means she was born, somewhere in early March. But the actual constellations would have been, 22 degrees off from that point when she was born. So if you're saying that she was an Aries cusp in the sidereal system in 1920, then that was approximately 1 degree ahead of where the Aries cusp is right now today.
Hopefully that answers the question, Claire. You can let us know. And Anna, welcome. Hello, and thank you for being here today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like if the Aries cusp is this point, the constellations are doing this. Tick, tick, tick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the thing is, we say it's 1 degree a year, 1 degree every 72 years, but it's not like, 72 years is up, 1 degree, 72 years is up, 1 degree, right? It's actually happening at the rate of like 53 seconds every year, which is part of why calculating this Ionamsha thing is hard, because once you start getting into the specific years, it's like, actually, it's quite subtle. And you can see why this math is now much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly why we like the tropical system, because the math is way simpler. And that allows you to spend less time messing with the hard math of figuring out the zodiac at all, and more time figuring out the math of making whatever predictions it is that you're trying to make.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, friends. And please remember to like and subscribe. My friend Robin here, who has a newer YouTube channel, but that does not mean that she is new to this space or the work that she does. She's been doing this for many, many years on other platforms. And I do see her slowly adding in some of her previous content from various Zoom calls and meetups. I love that. So if you could help, liking and subscribing and even sharing really helps us smaller channels grow. And we appreciate you being here today. And so I wanted to get to Desiree's question. She's asking some good questions. So she says, how do you feel about the asteroids being the divine feminine?
Ooh, okay. So I'll just give a little bit of background of what I think you're asking about for anybody who's listening here. And then if this is not what you're asking about, please feel free to drop that in the chat and tell me what you'd like me to address more precisely. So in contemporary astrology, we sort of have a problem, which is that there are only 2 planets that are sort of overtly feminine, and one is the moon and one is Venus. I will mention, by the way, that astrologers know that the sun and moon are not planets. We do know that. But we speak of them as planets as a category. Technically, they're called lights. Okay, but anyway, so part of the problem is that contemporary astrology can come off as sort of male focused, because it's traditional to talk about the sun as male and Mars is male, and by the way, Saturn is male, and then Jupiter's male too, and then of course Pluto is the king of the underworld, not the queen. He's the king, right? And then it's like, well, we have these 2 little feminine things over here, and it can feel sort of out of balance.
Yeah.
All right. So at one point, And this was, I think, back, okay, my timing might be off, but we're looking at like maybe the 80s here, or maybe even earlier, but like in the 19th century anyway. Of course, we become much more aware now of these imbalances between the feminine and masculine energy. And so there are 4 very prominent asteroids, which are all given female sort of names and associations. And they were brought in, especially by a wonderful woman named Demetra George, if you want to do some research. And they are Pallas, Pallas, which is the asteroid of like, sort of like your partner in the fight, like your ride or die friend, your shield maiden. Juno, Juno, which is an asteroid about romantic relationships and equality and partnership. Thank you, Elizabeth, for typing these in the chat. Pallas, Juno, Vesta, Vesta, which is an asteroid about your inner flame, and it's named after the Vestal virgins, who were powerful priestesses in ancient Rome. Juno, Pallas, Vesta, Ceres, Ceres, Ceres. I love people with Gemini placements because they're so good with this communication. Okay, Ceres, which is the goddess of the harvest, and it represents sort of your like natural connection to nature. So Ceres, Pallas, Juno, Vesta are 4 asteroids named after mythological figures. They're all feminine, and they represent these really important aspects of your natal chart. And many people feel that this has helped add the balance back in to have more feminine energy and more of a feminine present in the zodiac. It's sort of like too late to rebrand all the planets, but now we're adding these in. And I will say that I love them. And I have these in all my charts. Every time I do a client reading, I pull up all 4 of these. We just got through doing some really interesting work in synastry in my Patreon, which some of those replays, by the way, are available for free members if you want to go check that out, my Patreon. And we talked about Juno. You can put Juno on the ascendant and create a chart that explains how people function in romantic partnerships. Credit my spirit guides for giving me that idea. So I think it's really important to bring the divine feminine back in. And I think that these asteroids are a great way to do it. I found that delineating every one of them is important for people. Especially I find that Ceres is really important for people's natural connection. Most people don't think, I'm going to look at my astrology chart to understand how to connect with nature. But connecting with nature is such a huge part of human health. And we've often lost it because there's no training on that in school. There's lots of training on how to write an essay, right? Or how to drive or how to, but there's no training on connecting with nature. And so Ceres is really one of my favorites. And then Pallas, I find, is super important because it's an asteroid of partnership, and it helps you identify what feels like a good friend. And then this is key. If you have a romantic partner, but they don't feel like a friend, right? Like you're attracted to this person, or you have kids together, or you have so much in common, but they don't really feel like a safe, they have your back, you have their back. There's often a miscommunication or a disconnect with the Pallas's. Yeah. There's a cool story actually where this is Pallas. It's named for Pallas Athena. And it's a story of how in this particular myth, there was an accident on the training grounds and Pallas accidentally killed her best friend. So they were like sparring with swords because they were shield maidens. And she accidentally ended up killing her best friend. And so she vowed then to become the shield for other people who needed to protect their friends. So it's cool.
Yes, that is. I just got the chills when you said that.
All right. So
good.
in Islamic, I study the astrology from the Middle East, medieval Middle Eastern astrology, which is very good for me and super helpful. And I learned that there's, I don't know if this is right, but there's something like 12 different words for friends in Arabic from that era. And one of them was called your caravan companion. It's like your travel buddy, like you guys are, the 2 of you are locked in. And so understanding Pallas can really help you understand what creates that sense of friendship and companionship for you, which I think is super helpful. So if you feel like you end up being friends with the wrong people, or you get disappointed in friendships, or you feel like people are going to be buddies, but then they're not, like understanding your Pallas, and especially if there are aspects from Mars or Saturn to your Pallas, that might be why you're having those problems. And then once you figure that out, there are things you can do. And by the way, I do offer readings. So you can contact me through my website, and I do give readings if you're like, well, this all sounds really cool, but I need help.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Desiree, your ride or die. Exactly. It's like your ride or die companion. What is that energy that creates that? So I'll be honest and say my husband and I have this challenge where I love Steve and I think he's really great, but I have some childhood trauma and I do not trust easily. And so understanding my Pallas, which is very near my Mars, has helped me to sort of feel like I'm more friends with my husband, which I think has been really good for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I have actually had Robin do readings for me, and I mean, I just can't uh, find the words to articulate just how beautiful the experience is. And I am going to be working with Robin soon for my solar return. I'm very excited about that. And then in past, Robin has also helped me by reading for myself and my daughter. So she took both the charts, put them together, and helped us understand how we can learn to communicate with each other, which was, and I shared this with Robin, this was a turning point in my relationship with my daughter. And I believe that was like 3 or 4 years ago that we did this exercise, but it was truly a turning point because prior to then, I was just I couldn't understand. I felt like I'm an Aries, she's an Aries, like we should be like this and everything should be, like she should be able to finish my sentences. And I just felt like, what's going on? What's going on? And after that reading, and both of us, and it wasn't just like one-sided because even my daughter just, walked away from that. And I noticed that she slowly started to implement some of the changes. And now we're doing so much better in our communication. It's really a beautiful experience. So if you've never done it, I think it's worth the investment to do. And I feel that you learn things about yourself, or you find things that all of a sudden maybe they were confusing in past, and you feel like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense now I understand why. So yes, it's a wonderful experience. So sorry, there's my plug for
Thank
my
you. I
beautiful
appreciate
friend.
that. Yeah. Well, I will say that, I was an SAT tutor for 20 years. And so I worked with lots of families, lots of teenagers. And I didn't know anything about astrology when I did any of that. And now I'm like, man, I wish I had known what I know now, because I feel like, relationship astrology gets a lot of emphasis, and it should. Finding a good partner, understanding your romantic relationship. But I think relationships with parents and kids is a really underutilized aspect of relationship astrology. So I feel like I'm excited. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm excited to work with more parents and kids, because I think it's a big part of how astrology can help, really. Okay,
Mhm.
so I see a couple questions here, and I want to get to them. And I feel like maybe these last two questions, I might be running out of steam a little bit.
Okay. Okay.
So
So we'll wrap up with these final two questions. So we had Desiree asking if we could speak to Lilith, the asteroid and the moon aspect.
yeah,
And then the second question is likely a quicker question, which is,
yeah.
do you offer chart readings? If you're doing tiers, I don't
Mhm.
know if you've implemented them yet or not. Will you be including them in your memberships?
Yeah. So what I have at the moment, the Patreon is just getting going, and I have a basic tier. And what the basic tier allows you to do is you get you get 2 lectures a month, and then 2 live Ask an Astrologer office hours. And members can come to those, and you are welcome to come to the office hours and ask questions about your chart. So if you're like, I have a moon over here, or I heard what you said about the Pallas thing, can you look at my chart? I'm happy to do that as part of the general live. I don't actually offer readings as part of the Patreon. Like there's no tier where you get readings, mainly because I have some health challenges. And I don't want to be offering readings and have like a lot of people who need readings. And then all of a sudden I have some health problems and I'm not able to read for people for a couple of weeks. So I think I feel pretty like good that I can reliably offer lectures and a live. But I do read on a sliding scale. So if you join the Patreon membership and we talk about your chart and you're like, I feel like I really need some more help with this, I'm here because I want to help people with astrology. And I don't want finances to get in the way because I know that a lot of the people who need the most help are not in a great financial situation. They're on disability, they have health problems, there's single parents or whatever. So I would say if you want a reading and you need some help, I'd love to have you join the Patreon. You're welcome to ask your questions. And then if you want more help after that, just contact me and we'll work something out. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, Black Moon Lilith. You are speaking my language because this was huge for me. So I want to explain quickly what Black Moon Lilith actually is. There's an asteroid called Lilith, and then there's this Black Moon Lilith, which I hope is what you mean when you say the moon aspect of things. So it's actually really cool. So by the way, my mother is an astronomer. So my penchant for actually like describing how it works in the sky, I think comes from her. I hope okay. I hope that's okay. So the interesting thing is that the moon's orbit around the oh no, is it the Earth's orbit around? Oh no, I think it's the moon's orbit around the Earth. I think it's the moon's orbit around the Earth is an ellipse. So it's basically like it's not a circle. It's like a squashed circle, right? Like a racetrack, kind of. Right? Now, the cool thing about an ellipse is it actually has two centers, right? So a circle has one center. You're the center of the circle. But an ellipse, like my eyeballs are like the centers of an ellipse. And the interesting thing about the moon's orbit is that the Earth is at one of the centers, and the other center is an empty point. It's like a spot in the sky, but there's no actual object there. And in astrology, we call that Black Moon Lilith. Now, there's various ways that it can be sort of interpreted. I picked the simplest way, honestly. I just used the default astro.com setting. But it's an empty spot in the sky that almost is like the place where there should be another Earth, but there isn't, right? There's the Earth, and then there's this empty center, and there's nothing there. And I find that Black Moon Lilith in people's charts represents sort of where they're on the fringe, where they're on the outside, where people are sort of on the cutting edge of the evolution of their society. So there's an interesting point if we go back to the Bible where Jesus called his followers to come to him outside of the camp, right? The camp represented like the conventional Israelites who were all following their religion and doing their thing. And Jesus is like, I'm not in that conventional box with y'all. I'm out here, and anybody who wants to come to me can come out and be where I am outside of these social boundaries. So when I think of Black Moon Lilith figures, I think of like Gandhi, right? Or like Martin Luther King Jr., or Frida Kahlo, or performance artists who put on bikinis and paint themselves in crazy colors and stand in the street. Like, it's that edge where you're like, oh, okay, maybe this is where I'm not 100% conventional like that. And this is important because everybody has Black Moon Lilith in their chart somewhere, even people who are bankers and lawyers, and even people who are like 100% conservative. We all have that place where this is our responsibility to not get sucked into the sort of like conventions of our society, but instead to say, like, Jesus was like, you know what? I can talk to women in public. Now we think, of course you can talk to women in public, but back in his day, people literally were not allowed to talk to women in public that they were not related to, right? Jesus was like, you know what? Poor people are just as valuable as rich people. And we're like, hell yeah. But back in his day, they were like, that's not true. The poor are cursed by God. The rich are the people. Like, it's hard to believe how radical it was, right? When Martin Luther King Jr. that said, I had a dream that Black children and white children should be able to go to school together. We're like, yeah, right. But in his day, that was a hugely radical. So it's like, where are you planting the flag with what you think you should be doing or what you think society should be doing, you know, and it's like what everybody else thinks, be damned. So it's associated with fringy sort of things like, you know, alt spirituality and LGBTQ plus and protesting. And I have a very prominent Black Moon Lilith, and I spent a lot of my childhood being sort of ridiculed and squashed for like talking to trees, you know. And I finally just realized I can't do anything about this. This is in my 9th house of spirituality. There are a lot of aspects. It makes a direct trine to my ascendant. This is who I am. I can't be the conventional SAT tutor pretending for all of my wealthy upper class clients that I'm not like talking to my spirit guides in the middle of the sessions with their children. Like, I spent years afraid to be fringy because I was trained that people wouldn't like me and that nobody would respect me if I was honest. And then I finally realized, you know what, I gotta embrace my Black Moon Lilith. So I love Black Moon Lilith because I think it shows us how we are helping our society to evolve. Now, there's also an asteroid Lilith, and this sort of has different significations. And in a lot of ways, it has to do with sort of like desires or impulses that maybe aren't condoned by your society. It's named after like the asteroid, not the asteroid, but there's a mythological figure, Lilith, who was sort of known for doing things her own way, and maybe sometimes in a way that wasn't really so conscious of the benefits of other people. So you have a strong asteroid Lilith, or it's like very prominent in your chart. You have to be careful and make sure that you're not letting your own desires make you unaware of the impact it's having on others. But at the same time, you have to find a way to make sure that you can exercise those desires to the degree that they're healthy for you. So it's sort of like an impulse inside of you that pushes you to do your own thing. And then, as Elizabeth says, you have to exercise discernment about how and where and with whom. There's a famous story in the Islamic astrology about Lilith. And the big sin of Lilith is that during sex, she wanted to be on top. Like, that's her thing, right? Is that she insisted on being on top. And she was known for like using the men for her own sexual pleasure. It's a demon called Lilith. She's using her men for her own sexual pleasure and leaving them depleted and exhausted because she insisted in being on top. And we can look at this story and be like, okay, well, using people for your own pleasure and leaving them depleted and exhausted is not great. But on the other hand, women should be able to be on top if they want to, right? So that's what I think of when I think of the asteroid Lilith.
So good. Yeah. I love that.
Good.
And Champion Leader joined and says, I welcome all of you to visit the most ancient and spiritually rich country, India, to experience it.
Well, I'll tell you that when we flew over here because we're nomadic, so we're spending basically 6 months in the UK this year and Ireland. We flew over here and I was sitting next to a lady on the plane, and the flight attendant came up and asked if she would switch seats. And she said, honestly, no, I can't, because I get very panicky on planes, and I chose this seat because it has a view of the exit. So I'm sorry, I really can't change seats. And I turned to her and I said, you know, I'm a coach and I'm an astrologer. If at any point you need support during this flight, please feel free to ask me. And you can just, you know, grab my arm and look at me, and I'll know that you need to talk or you need to walk around, and I'd be happy to support you because I understand this is difficult. Anyway, we got into a whole conversation, and she invited my husband and me to come visit her in India.
Oh,
right? So I am
cool.
really looking forward. I've been always wanting to visit India, and I've been a little intimidated, to be honest. So I'm so excited the universe has provided us with somebody.
Oh, I love that. What a beautiful story. Oh, that is so cool.
And
Oh,
then somebody mentioned having a Virgo stellium, and I have 4 placements in Virgo on the descendant. So Virgo fist bump.
yes, I think that was Desiree that said that.
A lot of Virgo. Yeah.
Stellium and Virgo, 8 placements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a joke that one of my clients told me, and this client has a Leo sun. So anyway, she said, what's the difference between Leos and Virgos? And she said, the answer is that Leos think they know it all, but Virgos actually do.
I love that.
Right? Right.
Oh, that's
So then
funny.
this inspired me to create a whole series of jokes, because of course I'm not happy with a joke that only is, making my own sign look good. So I'm working on this series of jokes, like for every pair of signs, like, because I was like, I felt bad that Leo got the short end of the stick in this joke. So I was
Mhm.
like, okay, how about what's the difference between Cancers and Leos? And the
Mm,
answer is because Cancers are looking for an audience to heal, but Leos actually have an audience.
wow.
Yeah. And then
Oh
now
my
I have to
God.
do Gemini and Cancer. I got to work my way. I haven't made any progress beyond that one. I want to work my way around the zodiac.
Oh, I think that's a worthy project that you should continue. That's hilarious. Oh,
Yeah.
this time has been, I mean, this is better than I ever imagined. And I
Oh,
knew it would
good.
be, I knew it would be good. And it's been so great to, hear all of the different things. Thank you so much for finding time to come on and join us today. Um, this is my friend Robin. Please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to be updating the description box to include her Patreon, but there is a link there for her website, as well as her Instagram page. And is there anything else, Robin, that you would like to mention before we wrap up for today?
Yeah. So I wanted to say that two things. First of all, I said to my spirit guides, I'm getting better at learning to listen to my inner self. I'm not really great at this. I have 4 planets on my descendant, and I have no planets on my ascendant. So I have a lot of energy for like other people's stuff, and listening to myself is really hard. And um, thank you for people who are saying nice things in the chat. I really appreciate that. So anyway, so I said to my inner self said to me the other day, I'm just sick of having all of this astrology knowledge stuck in my head and nobody to share it with. And then they said, we have to go live. When are we going to do a live? And then I got, your invitation. And so this has been an answer to prayer. Literally, my inner self is like, I have something to say. I need people to say things to. So yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and thank you to everybody who showed up and has been so encouraging in the chat. It's really balm to my soul. I got a lot of childhood messages that said, if you're honest about what you think, nobody will like you. And so all of you people are proving that was bullshit. Can I say
Yes.
bullshit? Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm sorry if swearing causes problems with the algorithm. Okay. The second thing I will say is that when I first started with Elizabeth, which she now told me was 4 years ago, she didn't even have a YouTube channel. And she was amazing because she would always come on my events when I was doing meetup, and she was great at like keeping track of the chat. And I'm like, Gemini, I love my Geminis. But I just am so proud of you and so encouraged by like how far you've come, and this wonderful group of people who you obviously know many of these people. Like if I did a live, I would have a hard time finding people who would just show up when I'm like, hey, I've got something, and people would come. So like on Instagram or something like that. And so I just really honor how much you've built a great audience, and there's so much love and support in this community. And so good for you. The world needs your wisdom, your tarot reading, your smile, your authenticity. And it really does my heart good to see
Oh,
what you put.
thank you so much. That very first reading that you did for me, that was 4 years ago. And now I remember this like it was yesterday, because I remember being so freaking scared. You said, you're learning, you're in this phase right now where you're learning and you're picking up all these things and asking all the questions and exploring and doing all the things. But in 3 years, it's going to come to a point where you are going to have to do something about it. Like, you can't just continue in this learning evolution, forever and ever. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, oh, I have to think of something in 3 years. Well, of course I forgot all about that, right? And time passed. And then I thought to myself, gosh, I gotta like connect with Robin. Where's my little book? I wrote everything down. I pulled out my book and I saw that message that I wrote to myself that you shared with me. And I was like, oh, I created the YouTube channel. That's what she was talking about. And so Robin saw this coming for me 4 years ago, and I didn't see it. She saw that. So so great. If you have a chance to book time with Robin, I would highly appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I love you all, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who subscribed to my YouTube channel and checked out my Patreon. I really appreciate that. You guys are great.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
Okay.